Hi, Caitlin McGray is here, founder of Be Her Village. Welcome back to the Be Her Village podcast. We are a podcast that covers birth services, postpartum services, birth stories, parent stories, and really anything that I find interesting and I want to include on the podcast. So today, I am so lucky to be sitting across from Heather Simonson, who is the owner of Sea Change Holistic Wellness Center in Lindenhurst. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a sex therapist, a Reiki healer, and a yoga teacher. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Caitlin, for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm really excited today. The reason why I asked you on this podcast is because I saw what you did. You created Sea Change Holistic Wellness Center, and it's so beautiful. We're sitting in it right now. And I just reached out to you and I said, hi, I need to meet you. And you said, okay. So I came in, and within 10 minutes, I was talking about that time I found my G-spot and was having spectacular
You really were.
orgasms.
It was awesome.
And what I love about that meeting is that I didn't know that you were a sex therapist. That's just what I do. I just walk around telling anybody who will listen about orgasms, my orgasms, G-spots, and like having sex because it's kind of my new favorite thing. So then you were like, hey, I'm a sex therapist. So I want to talk about it.
Okay.
So can you tell me what a sex therapist is?
A sex therapist is a licensed professional. It can be a social worker, a psychologist, or whatever field they choose. And then is someone who does a postgraduate program. For me, it took me about 2 or so years to complete everything, the coursework, the supervision, the clinical hours, all relating to sexology and sex therapy. So I'm a clinical social worker, so it's taking what I do in practice in terms of that, but then being able to really specialize in the areas of sexuality. And so it really is, and it's not just in regards to sex either, but it could be, kids going through puberty. It could be around orientation or gender. It could be a desire discrepancy with a couple, sexual pain, or it could just be somebody or a couple who really wants to improve their sex life, which I don't know that a lot of people will, tend to seek help for that. So that not that there's a problem per se, but somebody who just wants to enhance things and have, the most blissful experience possible. So it really addresses such a wide range of areas around sexuality.
That's great. There's so much that I want to go into, but I think I want to talk a little bit before we go into like what it actually looks like to have a sex therapist and to visit a sex therapist is about who's using a sex therapist. Because you just listed some people. And I think for me, I'm always honest about my experience. So I loved sex when I was dating and when, my husband and I were married without children, which was like for 3 months and then got pregnant right away. But after kids, it changed a lot. And it felt to me like a chore that I did to stay married, which sounds awful, but it really it wasn't like he was pressuring me or I felt like I'm his wife. This is our relationship. We need to be having sex. But it was very much like once a week, let's have sex. Let's get it over with, because it was like absolutely not a priority for me. And so I think I'm on the other side of this postpartum, which is like an interesting place to be talking about sex and talking about sex for people who are birth workers working with pregnant and growing families, or speaking to people who are either pregnant and about to have kids or in the midst of their childbearing time. So I'm in this place where my youngest child just is about to turn 4 next month. And I'm like, if you could ever feel like I am loving the fact that we're done with little baby time, and I still love it professionally, but I'm definitely moving on from that in a personal way. And part of the moving on from it in a personal way is rediscovering how much I love sex, rediscovering how sexual I can feel and I can be. And it's a really it's become fun again. It's become something I think about and we talk about and we actively try to improve. So I wonder how many couples are out there that are actually kind of in that rote stuck. I don't know if stuck is the right word, but this kind of like, we're just going to do it and it is what it is. And it's just a fact of life that maybe could really benefit from sex therapists, but didn't even know that they existed. Because until I met you, I knew probably that the concept of sex therapy was a thing, but it was really far deep down in my brain. It wasn't like, oh, sex is like not what I want it to be. Let me call a sex therapist. So can you talk a little bit about, are people finding you in that way? How are people communicating with each other about sex? Or are people landing in your office and saying, we would like to improve our sex life? And if they're not, do you think maybe they should be? Like, do you think there's an unreached population out there?
Yes, to all of that, I think.
We can only guess.
Yes, a big resounding yes. So, first, I think that your experience is not unique, right? And that the majority of people that at least land in my office or a sex therapist office, I mean, I can't speak for other therapists, but at least mine,
Mm-hmm.
I would say the majority of, if not all, couples who have children who are seeking sex therapy, it's that many of them, the issues started once they had kids. Some of them, depending upon how their fertility went, maybe it started before that, if they had a difficult time getting pregnant, or if they needed to go for fertility treatments, or because the dynamic of sex completely changes, right?
Right. It's almost like fertility issues
change.
Or not. Like the way we treat sex before we're trying to have a baby, it's like purely sexual, purely primal and pleasure. And like, I want you and you want me and let's go have sex. Whereas when you start planning for a baby, it really becomes like, I am ovulating for the next 6 hours. Drop your pants.
It can be.
It can become clinical. It can become a little forced and like a little less spontaneous.
It can be.
Yeah.
So for some, it puts more of the fun into it, right? Like of knowing like that, oh, we're doing this for this reason. And it's not just about pleasure. And so it's very different for everybody. Mm-hmm. But I would say that, like I said, probably the majority, if not all of the couples that I see who have children, if they're coming for sex therapy, it started once they got pregnant or right after they had kids. And there are so many different reasons for that. But for the most part, the person who gave birth or the person who is, if there is a primary caregiver in the duo, then they're drained. A lot of it is like energy, right? You know, it's your energy and your time and your attention and your nurturing. So much becomes focused on this new being that's in your life, right? Whether it's a new baby or you adopted or whatever it is, that focus on now raising this human, that two things usually go. What, right? Because we have this energy tank and we need to be able to have it filled in other ways, which a lot of it is from our own self-care, right? Which is really what needs to primarily happen. Yeah. And oftentimes it doesn't. And so we look to other sources to fill that, to our family, to our village, right? Hence why you're doing what you're doing, to their partners. And a lot of times people don't necessarily have that, or you get into love languages issues of my partner's thinking that they showing me love or thinking that they're giving me what I need, but really it's not really what I need. So I don't really feel loved, even though they're saying that they're doing all these things. Right. So that, that just becomes a cycle of sorts. And so it's either themselves, their own self-care, their health, their energy, their fitness, their social life, their sexuality, whatever, or their relationship goes to the side. Right. So because like I said, we only have, we have a reserve of energy. And if we're not doing things regularly to fill that reserve, then at the end of the day, when for many couples, that's the time to be intimate, it doesn't happen because there's just nothing, there's oftentimes just nothing left to give. And you said like, it felt like a chore. that's
it absolutely felt like
and
a
that's
chore.
what the
a chore I was willing to do. Like, I don't
right.
want to do other chores either, but I was willing. I mean, really, I hate housework. That's like a whole other, I do not like housework at all. Like, as soon as I have any extra money, I'm hiring a maid.
There you go.
For my life.
I hear you.
Just to follow me around. But I was willing to do it because I loved my husband and I knew that that's something he needed. There's something that just popped into my head while I was listening to you talk about that self-care and that how much energy we're expending on our child is a phrase that I don't even think I knew about before I became a mother of a newborn. The phrase touched out. There is just like this intense that I think before you have a baby, you can't even really conceptualize how much our bodies are in contact with our baby. And whether you're breastfeeding or not, but I was breastfeeding and it certainly heightened like the 24 hours access to my breasts, which were, by the way, formerly a sexual part of my body. And it was like a favorite part of my body that was like really involved in our sex life. And then for 6 long years over the course of my nursing 3 children, they were off limits completely. And that it's a really big shift, I think, to have your body be something that is available for you and is available for your partner. And then suddenly this child that you love and you're excited about and you're nurturing and they're so cute. But at the end of the day of being home, of being sleeping with the baby and being up with the baby, and then they're on you and they just need so many things. There's like this feeling of, if one more person touches me, I'm going to lose it. I think I'm like particularly sensitive to touch, but I think that's something that many new moms experience, new mothers in particular, of this like touching out feeling, which I can imagine for their partner is frustrating to like walk in and be like, okay, well, I would like to also touch you in a sexual way.
And that's just it, right? So I haven't heard that phrase before.
Oh, you haven't?
Touched out.
Oh,
Is
my
that
goodness.
What you said?
Yeah.
Touched out?
Yeah.
I haven't
Maybe
heard
I
that.
made it up.
You might have. I really love
Trademark
it.
Caitlin McGrath.
There you go. Right here on the Be Her
Live.
Village podcast.
Groundbreaking things are happening, guys.
So, but I think that's a really interesting concept, right? Because of a couple of things. One, before what you said, I thought it was really interesting. If I can kind of flip it back around on you for a second,
I love
where
when
you
do
said
that.
you do. Be careful what you wish for.
You do that to me all the time. I love it.
Something that you said about like, well, you know, there were a lot of chores that you knew you needed to do, but like this is something you were willing to do because it would make him happy, right? So I think that that's a big piece of what happens is that we look at it as a chore, and this is, you know, for a lot of women, but it isn't necessarily to make us happy, right? We're not looking at it as like, this is something that I'm doing for myself, that this is something that's pleasure for me, that this is something that it feels so much like that we're doing it for somebody else and that we're giving it to them. It was a sacrifice. It's that it was a sacrifice.
Yeah, it was not a shared, I mean, obviously like there's pleasure in it, but I would have been just as fine going to sleep.
And many really, people say that very, very often, right? Yeah. And so I think that there's a difference, right? Like with a baby or with our children, they're not, I don't know if they're how much they're taking from us, but they are, right? In a sense, like we're that skin hunger, and that's actually a part of sexuality is skin hunger. Like
I like that way better than touched out.
Skin hunger. Well, but I think it's
a different concept.
I think it's like the
but what is skin hunger?
So so there is a model called
sounds
the
like
Circle.
A band name.
It sounds like what?
Like a band name.
It does sound like a band name, but it's pretty awesome to even know about it.
Yeah.
But there's a model by Dennis Daly, a well-known and respected sexologist, that's called the circles of sexuality. And so when people hear the word sexuality, like if they hear, oh, I'm a sexuality educator or something, right? They think all I do is talk about sex. When in reality, sexuality encompasses so much of who we are, right? Like who we are, how we like to be touched, how we like to be communicated with, how we feel about our womanhood or our manhood, our orientation, our sexual and reproductive health. I mean, I can just go on, right? So there's one aspect of it that's called skin hunger, which is literally a humans need to be touched. We actually have a need. And if we don't have that fulfilled, we can very much feel the effects of that emotionally, psychologically.
Wow.
I mean, if you think about just even as a doula for yourself, like how much do babies need to be held?
Constantly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like how much do babies need one-on-one, skin to skin.
My daughter's going to be
literally
4.
a term,
She
right?
still like will just come on me and just like get as much of her body on me as she physically can. It's like she just needs that connection. She needs to like feel where she is in space and time by glomming onto me.
And oftentimes so does my 9-year-old, which if he heard this, he probably wouldn't be very happy that I'm saying it.
So don't share this podcast.
But that's what he will maybe. But I think that that's safe to say. Like it's so good. It's so good. And even this weekend we were talking about like, well, what are some other ways that we can connect? But that's a whole different story in another podcast.
Okay.
But all that to say is that we actually do have a need to be touched, right? But I think that what happens is that because we're touching our children in a way that is fulfilling for us, but also in a way that is giving. And then you have your partner coming in and it feels like that touch is, again, for them, right? Or it's like, yes, I want to touch you, but it's not like, oh, let me, and not all the time, but, oh, what do you need? Can I rub your hands for you? Can I give you a shoulder rub? How about I rub your temples? How about I just, caress your skin? Or how about a foot massage? Or how about like anything that is giving to you in regards to touch? And I think that that's a part of what is missing in a lot of relationships. Yeah. And it's, there is something to non-sexual touch. Yes. And we don't talk about that as much. And whether that, and this is, for heterosexual couples, right? That for men, and maybe not even just heterosexual couples, but couples that are involving a man in the relationship, but that for a lot of men, that affection, like what is affection viewed as when you're a man, right? Like if 2 men hug, I mean, in certain ways in sports and whatever, that might be more socially acceptable. Right. But there's a lot of discomfort around being affectionate in that way. And men, I think, are fairly socialized to think that touch is, I don't want to say equates to being sexual, but I think it's pretty close.
Yes.
And so like when there's that touch that comes into play, then it feels like, oh, they want to touch me and it's for them. It's not for me. But maybe if the script was flipped a little bit and it's like, hey, can I give you a back rub? Or like, and this is non-sexual touch. And this is just for you. Then maybe the dynamic can change a little bit.
I love that. While you're saying that, I'm thinking about, and we're past that now, but I'm thinking back to that time when I was touched out and overwhelmed and home with the children all day. And like, anytime I would get close to my husband, like physically close to him, it was like automatically, it was like turned on, want sex. And sometimes I would be like, I literally just want to like be able to hug you without the assumption that we're going to go have sex right now. So you're really like hitting a nail on the head of like every touch of contact. I sometimes just wanted to hug or to snuggle. It sounds ridiculous, but I wanted to snuggle. I think snuggling is really comforting. And it's like, I feel like I'm connecting to him then. But it like always goes from like 0 to 100. So it sounds like it's non-sexual touch in the sense that it's not leading to like penetrative sex that ends in orgasm, but it is sexual in that it's like a way to connect with somebody. It's almost like we have to redefine what sex is and what sexual touch is.
What sex is in different regards, but I think what being sexual is, or sensual even is, right? And that's a lot of what I do with my clients is working on redefining what sex is. So like, let's say that someone gives birth and I have this, fairly often, and there are, because of a traumatic birth or because of issues in healing or whatever it is, that sex is now painful.
Yep.
Right. So, and that happens.
Very common.
It's very
People
common.
People are not talking about it.
Right. Or even if it's not painful, if it's, let's say there's pelvic floor dysfunction and a woman has incontinence issues and they haven't gone to see a pelvic floor physical therapist.
Which they should do.
Which they should do, by the way, which we also have here at C-Chain. And
you do?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Who's coming here?
Ariane.
She was at that. Yes, I've met her a couple of times. Very good. Oh, I love it.
Yes. And so we need to be able to redefine what sex is so that couples can still be intimate and it doesn't need to be penetrative.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be. or even if a man, let's say, has a difficult time in having an erection or keeping one, which is a lot of times what is happening. It may not necessarily be related, although if I kept going back and back, it could be, but right to birthing.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, well, will it not feel good still if you're touched, even if it isn't hard? Are there not still plenty of fun things that you can still do that are sexual or sensual that can still give you a way to connect and feel good and be pleasured or offer pleasure, be receptive to that? Like, there's still so many things, but we have in our head that sex equates this particular goal.
Right. Penis and vagina ending in orgasm for one or both. Yeah. There's like a real narrow vision of what sex actually means.
Yes. And not necessarily a penis, right? Because not every couple has a man involved. But no, in general, yes. Like that's exactly what
standard.
Happens.
And it's like when we start to actually branch out from that, there can be so many more opportunities for positive sexual interactions.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, everybody needs you, Heather.
I just think I don't know that everybody needs me, but I think that everybody needs to start talking more openly about sex, right?
I could not agree more.
We're in this sexually saturated world, but completely repressed.
Yes.
Like how could it's right? Like, and I think the Super Bowl could be a nice, way
let's talk about the Super Bowl
just for a second.
Okay.
Like last year, and I was bothered by it, I will say, that when Adam Levine removed his shirt during the Super Bowl.
I'm so not an Adam Levine fan, by the way. Can we just talk about
he's okay.
I don't know. Is someone attracted to him?
Somebody.
Somebody must be.
Somebody is.
I don't get it.
But as soon as he took his shirt off and we were at a party and I just said, why? Literally, like, why? Why does that need to happen? Why is that necessary? It doesn't make any sense to me. Why do we have to sexualize all of this, right?
Wow, it's so interesting to hear that from a sex therapist.
Yes,
People must have been surprised at your Super Bowl party.
That what?
People must have been surprised at the Super Bowl party to have the sex therapist, like, sounding conservative, sounding like, why are we sexualizing
I think there's
this?
something to be said about modesty, right? And then you have this year with J-Lo and Shakira, and that was all the talk.
Oh my God, yeah.
For how many days?
Well, they were super hot. It was incredible.
They were super hot.
Yeah.
And people asked me this, well, did you have issue with that? I was like, actually, in a way, I did. Not because I don't think that they should promote a strong sexuality or a female presence or anything like that. But again, like, and maybe J-Lo's outfit was actually like nude and not actually showing her skin. But like, why do we have to sexualize even their outfits and their bodies in order for them to give the same exact performance?
Yes.
Why does it need to be
I had a similar reaction. I was sitting, it's so funny that you brought up Super Bowl. I was sitting in a room with a bunch of men that I respect and love. That's why they were in my house. And some teenagers, one of which was a girl, my niece. And I don't think my daughter was in the room, which was great. But the men were all commenting so much on the bodies of the women. And it made me uncomfortable. It did. And I didn't call them out on it, which is not like me. And I actually talked to my husband about it after. Because I gave him a look, like, while all the men are like, just making really crude comments that like took these brilliant, talented, like business savvy, successful women who are influential for our culture and broke them down to like nice ass, and like nice abs and like, yeah, that's incredible how she looks like that. And it became for me like, wow, there's so much more to what they're doing. It made me uncomfortable that we were like breaking it down, especially in front of a 12-year-old girl.
But when things are sexualized like that, it can take away from all of the wonderful messages that they were putting out there. Right? I mean, it really can, because that becomes then the focus of like how hot they look.
Sells,
and
right?
Sex, and sex sells, right? But like, what about all of the other amazing things that they were doing to bring awareness to their culture or to political things that were going on, right?
I didn't even catch them. I was so busy dealing with like the comments in my living room that I didn't even notice the political messages.
And so as much as I honor and respect J-Lo and Shakira and do think that they're beautiful, amazing, sexy women, by showing up that way, does it take away from your message and, and really the substance of what they're really trying to do?
I mean, I love that question, but I have to throw a question back out. If they didn't look like that and they didn't take their clothes off, would they even have the chance to put the message out there? And
that's a really valid question.
There's no right answer to that. It's just something really to think about.
Question. But again, the sex, that's what sells.
The sex is what sells. But I love what you just touched on. We're sitting in a living room watching, it's a family, Super Bowl's a family event, and we're watching these half naked women, and that's acceptable. But in the privacy of our homes and breastfeeding in public, I feel like we're not talking about sex enough. I don't know,
exactly.
Just on a
That's
personal friendship level. I have my very close friend and her husband, he talks about sex all the time. And he's actually the one that made me more comfortable in talking about sex all the time. And I think I talk about it so much now I make him uncomfortable, which is a nice turnaround. But it's without that, I wouldn't have talked about it. I wouldn't have learned more about it. I wouldn't have been so comfortable. I wouldn't have walked into your office and been like, hi, I had a G-spot orgasm that changed my life, before I even knew who you were. I'm so comfortable now talking about it. And I'm so used to talking about it with people. And I think I've surrounded myself with people that are used to me talking about sex. And it's partially the doula work, but it's also partially what's been going on for me personally. That I was at dinner with my two friends that are they're very sweet and they're very Catholic and they're very shy. And just casually over pizza, I just asked them what their long-term birth control plan was. They just got giggly and white, and we've laughed about it since, but I didn't even realize that's an awkward question to ask because I just am so used to talking about sex and birth and body parts and things like that. But I think that there is this closeted thing where we're really over sexualized in our media, and there's no talk about real sex, about actually with our partners, about both our successes. Remember over lunch, we're agreeing we're going to text each other every time we have an orgasm because it's let's celebrate that. But there's also, because we're not even talking about when it's good, we're not talking about when it's bad. Yeah. And I have found out over the past couple of years, I have found out more couples than I ever thought that I know in my life are not sexual. They're not having any sexual contact on the long term, on the long scale. And it's it floors me.
It becomes the thing that you think that you can't live without, or that you can live without.
That you can live without.
Can live without.
I get the impression.
But more so for women. I know that over a conversation that we had talked a little bit about, the majority of people who contact me for sex therapy are usually the men.
Yes, which surprised me for a couple of reasons.
Or it's the woman who's calling, because that's what oftentimes will happen, is they're the ones making the phone call, but it's their male partner
that's interested.
Yeah. That's making it okay, well, either you're the issue or this is that important. Whereas very often, I think you said it before, it's well, you feel like you could just kind of live without it.
Right.
And I do believe that because of the way that our culture has done us a disservice with women and sex and sexuality, that's a big part of why, right? Man's being sexual, it's celebrated if they have, right? Yes. And these are stereotypes to some degree, right? Yes. But I think safe to say that very oftentimes if a man is having multiple partners or they're being super sexual or whatever, it's celebrated, right? It's I don't even know how to categorize it because I would never use that language, but it's celebrated, right? Yes. But if it's a woman,
then she's a slut. Yeah. I mean, I remember even, this is going way back, but I remember in middle school, when sexual talk started amongst peers, I remember it being something, again, the boys would talk about jerking off or something. And it was it was celebrated and it was fine. And you could never say you masturbated as a girl. It was just not allowed. Mm-hmm. And I think in some extent, it has carried over into adulthood that women are not talking about sex, but they're also not. I mean, I have friends that have never had an orgasm,
Mm-hmm.
that don't masturbate.
Mm-hmm.
As
do I.
I giggle because I'm uncomfortable about that, but like I feel for them because they're missing out on something that I have found, at least in my perspective. That might not be like the politically correct way to put it, but I feel for them.
Well, we have to be sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of people who have certain values around that and to be honorable about that. But barring any type of cultural or religious, or even if it's not cultural or religious, and it's just that those are their values, outside of that, it's a really
the people
important.
I'm thinking of, it's like not by choice. Like it's not like a cultural or lifestyle choice. It's like they would love to be having orgasms, or the friends that are in sexual or in marriages that don't have sex. Like they would love to be having sex, and they used to, but it's like something has happened that they're not. And there's I think part of why I wanted to talk to you today, like there's this lack of talking about it. There's this lack of being open about it. But then there's like this lack of urgency also. There is this, we can live without it. I will just shut that part of my life down.
Yes.
And that feels really sad for people who would otherwise, with a little bit of help, perhaps, be able to find that part of themselves and find that connection with their partner again.
It is really sad. And I think that one of the things that we don't really see or understand, because we're not really a culture who talks about sex, is that even though we do have this perception, and I guess it's a reality that we can live without it, don't for a second think that not having a healthy sexuality or healthy sexual energy kind of running through our bodies, that it doesn't have a negative impact on us, right? I mean, then we get into more of like the yogic perspective of energy system and chakras, and right, like, so we have a human energy system, and there are much more than 7 chakras, but there are 7 major ones that run along the center of our body, throughout the center of our body. The second chakra is our sex center, right? It's where everything related to sexuality, reproduction, and it's also our creative energy lies there, right? It's right beneath our navel, where our sacrum is, right? So right in the center where a womb is, right? Where all of our organs is, where all of the juices flow. Like, that's where it is all stored. And when in any energy center, if it's out of balance, it will affect everything else, including even illness. The yogic philosophy of physical illness, as at least my understanding of it, is that it is a physical manifestation of an energetic imbalance. And so if there are emotional or psychological things that happen that are unresolved in our life, if there are things that have happened that has affected the flow of a particular energy center, that in that area, that's where physical illness will occur. So the philosophy of like, oh, somebody has heart disease. Yes. Could there be things like you smoke? Well, you're literally filling your, not you smoke, but I'm saying a person smokes, right? You're literally filling your lungs with smoke. So of course it's going to affect the energy flow there and the health of your heart and your muscles and all of those kinds of things. So wherever there is something unresolved, that tends to be where illness will happen. And so again, I almost hesitate to say that, because I don't want people to then think about like, oh, well, I have these particular issues in this area of my body. So is that my fault? Did I do something? Like, we have to be careful of that.
I love that you mentioned that, because I think that's a really slippery slope for people to go down. It's like, yes, there's a mind-body connection. Yes, our spiritual and energy and emotional, our tissue stores our emotional traumas in it.
Exactly.
So, yes, physical illness can be related to that, but at the same time, like, you can't, if you get cancer or you have a heart attack or something, you can't blame yourself. I love that you just pointed that out,
because it's important. You have to be careful about
that. People out there that will blame themselves and try to work through, and there's like this moral equivalence for illness, and that's not a healthy way of using that knowledge. Right?
It's not a healthy way of using that knowledge. Right. It's like I went into a store a couple weeks ago with a friend of mine, and it was like gemstones, right? Like so quartz and hematite and like all these things. And there were these little signs that says, what did it say? It said something like, do not touch. If you touch it, you break it. Karma will get you, or karma is.
That's a little aggressive for a gemstone shop. No?
I was like, I'm not buying anything here. Clearly, they don't understand karma or energy. That's not how it works.
Wow.
That's not how it works.
Or shoplifting for that.
Or anything like that. All right. So, but not to like go too far away from what we're saying, but like in terms of our sexual health, if that part of our energy is not flowing, then it's going to affect us in different ways. It can affect our creativity. It can affect our motivation. It can affect our self-esteem, our confidence. It can affect so many other areas of our lives, but I don't know, because we're not talking about it, that people really attribute those other problems to, oh, maybe it's because this part of me is shut down. You said that before. Like for some people, it is.
It feels, I love that you're saying that sexual, it can really feel separate, like this completely separate, behind closed doors, once a week area of your life. And I could see the way our society treats it. I could see how it's like, what does my sex life have to do with my mood? What does it have to do with my choices, with my everything? And like I just want to speak to what's going on for me, because that's all I can speak to. But I don't think it's a coincidence that over the past 6 months, when my sex life like took a huge upward turn, and I found out all kinds of things about how to find pleasure in my partner and my body, and it's become like a real not chore. It's been a hobby and something that we look forward to and I'm much more connected to. I don't think it's an accident that at the same time I like have this wonderful creative idea for Be Her Village, and suddenly I'm taking chances and risks and moving forward in this creative place. Once I talked to you about that, I was like, oh, this is all connected. Look at that. Yep. And I wonder then, like, those days, I mean, everybody has them, those days / months that you wake up and like, you're just getting through your life, and you go to work and you make dinner and you put the kids to bed. And it's like this kind of mechanical way of existing. It's interesting that you're probably not having, mind-blowing sex while you're having life like that. Like they're so interconnected. And yet somehow we've managed to.
You're right. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, right? Of like, we kind of compartmentalize.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Sex.
Yeah.
Itself and our sexualities of like, oh, this thing over here, I don't really have time for that necessarily. But like you said, like, I don't think that many people are drawing the connections between that and how it is impacting their health in so many different ways and their success, right? Yes. I mean, literally your creative energy is the same as our sexual energy.
I love that. That needs to be shouted.
It's the same.
Wow.
It is the same. And you don't need to have, and by the way, all this I know that we're talking about women who are having babies and things like that. And not that there's always a partner involved in having a baby, right?
Absolutely.
But like,
yes.
And you're talking about masturbation. And so like, we can still have a healthy sexuality and still be sexual without having a partner.
Definitely.
Just to kind of throw that out
I love
there.
That. That's good, because there's lots of single moms. There's lots of people who are single moms by choice that have used fertility treatments, or single moms not by choice that might be listening to this going, oh, great, I can only be creative if I find somebody to partner up with. But it's not about a partner. Partners can make it more fun, right? But it's something
it could, or maybe, or maybe not. Or maybe
it
not.
It really depends on the partner.
It really depends on the partner, and it really depends on communication, and it really depends. It depends upon a lot of things.
I love
but
that.
Just to make sure that people are knowing and hearing that, like, you do not have to have a partner to be sexual or to have a healthy sexuality.
I love it.
I think that that's another just, disservice that our society has given us of like, oh, you're not healthy or happy if you don't have a partner and you can't be sexual.
And that's part of the issue that we were talking about earlier, where sexuality and sexual interactions, like, it's this narrow of like two people together. It can be by yourself. It can be with more than two people. I mean,
it could
more
be.
Power to you,
Why not?
Yeah. Okay. So switching gears before we go down that path.
We could just keep going. You
We
have a
could.
whole day?
What are we have our martini podcast scheduled, so maybe we'll go into group sex during that. So I want to talk about, for our listeners who are people who are working with birthing families or are birthing and growing families, what types of things? So we've talked all about how self-care is important, and then we've talked about when you're not taking care of yourself, how sex becomes this chore and it becomes maybe non-existent in your relationship. So what are the types of things a family who's going to add a baby or is about to be pregnant or just had a baby, what are the types of things that they can be thinking about, that they can be looking out for, that could they come and visit a sex therapist before there's a problem? And what would that look like? Like, what are the types of things that they should be thinking about? Maybe to become before they're in crisis and, hey, we haven't had sex in 3 years.
Yes.
But what can they do before it gets to that boiling point?
I think it's a really smart thing to plan ahead. I mean, I have one couple now that I'm working with that has done just that. Like they, wanted to get things sorted out before they brought another baby into the world. And so planning for that is a really good idea. So I think that one thing is to keep in mind what we were just talking about, is that being sexual and being sensual and creating connectedness with two people doesn't need to involve this, what's the word I'm looking for? This culturally created idea that we have of what sex is. I think people really need to I don't know that that's first and foremost, but I think that that's a really important piece of it, is that we really need to get creative about what sex and being sexual and being sensual really is. It's like it reminds me of when people come into Baby and Me yoga classes and they think that the yoga class is going to be quiet and relaxing and zen and fluid and flowing and all the things that we would expect to walk into a regular yoga class. And that's not at all what it is. It's the ability to be able to be in those situations and to learn how to just be present with everything and to not be reactive in a negative way, right? So like, can you still keep your connection to your breathing despite the fact that your baby's crying or screaming or somebody else's kid is, or that another baby just goes. So like, I think it's just redefining what this looks like, right? And having conversations of like, okay, well, if it's a no, right? If I'm approaching you for something sexual and it's a no, can it not be a no, but can it be well, how about this instead? Right. I wish I could find a catchy phrase to call that, right? Like, well, what about this instead? Right. So like, I'm not up for this tonight, but instead, do you think that maybe we can cuddle or we can spoon or I can give you a massage or we can do something else? Can we take a bath together, a shower?
Which more often than not, at least in my house, when we agree to like that one thing, it totally turns into sex anyway.
And for many, it does.
There's no pressure. It's like, my husband, can we have sex? Like, I don't really feel like it. Can I give you a massage? Sure. And then like, it just turns me on. And then we're, before you even know it, but there's that pressure to perform or to be ready is gone.
Yeah. Well, and that's also part of that, what can be foreplay, right? I think a lot of people don't, really place the value on emotional foreplay, right? And so like real foreplay really happens from the minute that you wake up to the moment that you go to bed, right? It's not just like, oh, it's the end of the night, we're getting in bed and, a little touch, a little pat here. And like, that's your foreplay.
Like you know exactly what to do so that in 30 seconds you could be having sex.
But that's like the biggest sex organ that we have is our brain.
Yes.
And so all of this to say like, it's not just like being touched out, but it's also like, are we being mentally and emotionally nurtured and stimulated, right? Even if it's, oh, I love how hard you're working, to breastfeed our child, like even just, and that gets into, again, love languages. There are 5 of them, according to Gary Chapman, who wrote this book. But, there's all different kinds of ways.
What are the 5 love languages?
Oh, I'm going to forget one because I always do.
We'll work together.
So 5 are physical touch is one. Words of affirmation is another, or expressions of gratitude. I don't remember exactly how he phrases it, is another. Gift giving is another. acts of service is another. And then there's a fifth one. I always forget the fifth one. It's never the same one.
Okay. So I'll just ask you in 5 minutes. You'll go through the
I'll
list
remember
again,
it. I will remember it. I won't remember right this second. But
That's okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So, and basically the premise of that book is we tend to show love to other people in the ways that we want to be shown love. And that's a big part of the communication issue, right? So I have a couple who, again, they're coming in and we're planning on having another baby. And a lot of the issues started when they had their first baby. And they just kept saying, well, but I was there for you. I did all these things. I took off of work. I did this. I did that. And they were like, okay, yes, I needed those things, but that wasn't really nurturing me.
Right.
That was taking care of our home and the chores and like all, and that was a relief for me,
right.
but that still wasn't nurturing me. Right. And so her love language was, quality time. See, I told you I would come up with
it. You got it. Good.
The fifth one is quality time. So like maybe that would be quality time that you're spending with one another. Right. Or maybe it's physical touch, which does not translate into sex. Physical touch is not equal to sex. It's the skin hunger. It's the affection. It's the, it's running my fingers through your hair or rubbing my finger down your nose. Or that's how I used to like to fall asleep, is like a little rub on the nose.
I love that.
Yeah, right? And, so it really has to be discussed. And I would even suggest people to take this test that's at the end of the book. You can even find it online.
Oh, I love it.
And to see like what your love language is. Yeah. And you talk about like, well, what kinds of things can I do to nurture you like during this time, right? So there's that. There's the communicating about what each other needs. There's making the time for foreplay. Again, that could be like, I'm going to warm your car up for you in the morning, or I'm going to bring you coffee in your in bed, or I'm going to, I wish I did it more often, which I'll remember to do it now. But like sometimes I'll take my kid's towel or my partner's towel and I'll throw it in the dryer.
Oh my God.
To heat it up
for me. That sounds amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the simplest, quickest thing. Like when I remember and like you get out and like your towels are nice and warm and cozy, right? It's so sweet.
I love that.
Like just like those little things, like we're, getting little messages throughout the day or sending a meme, or like we spend so much time and I have to do it myself more. Like I spend so much time and not even enough, of like, what am I going to put up on Instagram today? Finding a meme or a cute picture or whatever. Like, do we do that for our partners? Right. How often are we sending them little things that are inspirational like that?
My brother and sister-in-law, I don't know if they still do it. I hope they do. And it's actually a question I want to ask now. But throughout their dating time, they would just send each other the cutest puppy pictures that they could find. And it was just like every now and then a puppy picture. And like, everybody loves puppy pictures. Right. And it was it was more meaningful for them because it was like coming from the person you love. Exactly. But that falls into that. So what I'm thinking of when you talk about this is I'm thinking about how, as a birth doula, I think about labor, and we talk about this with our couples. I talk about labor being this thing that kind of like, it's like a crucible. Like it strips everything away from you. Every single contraction, it strips everything you have away. And you're just kind of left with like the essence of you, which is, for some people that's exciting. And for other people, they're scared to see what's underneath all of that. I think in a lot of ways with sexuality and parenting is that crucible. Parenting is like, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, like making someone coffee. And my husband makes me coffee every morning. And it makes me so happy to be cared for in that way. It takes 2 minutes, but when you're inundated with the demands of children, with the demands of work and life and adulting, I'll just call it adulting. When you're inundated with those demands, it's almost like the labor for birth. It's like we get stripped down, and those parts in our relationship that aren't solid get exposed. And so it sounds almost like you're saying, what does love language have to do with sex? Like, well, it has everything to do with sex, because the sex is almost like the pinnacle of that expression. So when we're feeling really connected, when we're feeling really secure in our relationship and we're taking care of ourselves and each other, then good sex happens.
Yes.
Wow. That's
exactly it. That's exactly it. And for many women in particular, and I don't want to be a generalist and say that this is the case for all women, but for many women, our brains and our hearts need to be connected and stimulated before our sexuality, right? Or maybe not before our sexuality. That's not fair to say, but more like our sexual energy, right? So like before we can even think to be really sexual, we need to feel mentally and emotionally connected, right? So like if you think about it in terms of energetic, our energies kind of work from the top down. Whereas for men, and again, I'm being heterosexist, I'm being generalist, but for many men, in order for them to feel loved or feel emotionally connected, very oftentimes their energies work from the bottom up. I don't remember where I heard that. I think it probably was at a conference that I went to, but like they described it like that. And it just makes so much sense. Like that. And I think that our culture plays into that in terms of like, again, equating this, like in order for you to be loved, you need to be sexual or like equating it somehow. And that's not the case. It doesn't need to be, but when it comes to them being in a relationship, I think a lot of men tend to fall on that side. Like if they're not having that need fulfilled, then they're not feeling enough, or that they don't feel like their partner loves them, or they don't feel that their relationship is even good sometimes. Right. And that's not always the case. It's not always the case. And so we need to start tuning into that our energies work in that way. And that and this is experiential and somewhat research driven, of like, if a woman doesn't feel connected in that way, then to get her to be sexual is very oftentimes very difficult.
Oh my goodness, to say the least. I'm sorry, I'm just speaking from my own. This came up when we were having lunch, when I was like, I just had like the best orgasm. We had such great sex. And it was so interesting because we like laid in bed and I literally just talked about my day for like 20 minutes. I just talked and talked and talked. And I didn't, it didn't feel sexual to me. I knew we were going to have sex, but I talk, so I'm talking and talking and talking about my day. And then boom, we have this like incredible orgasms. And it was like, whoa, and my husband said to me, and I didn't know about this like top down, down up thing. He said, well, if you notice, when I just like let you go and talk about your day and you get like a lot of your stress off of your plate, you just like have a much better time during sex.
Because most people need to be emotionally intimate for that to,
because it's not just like getting rid of the stress on my plate. It's like connecting with him over my day and over my thoughts and feelings that I'm having. And then it leads to like an incredible physical connection.
Exactly.
So I know from the female perspective anyway, that is, so when you said that, and it's the opposite for men. And I find that with my husband, like, he's like really grumpy when we don't have sex, and he's like not a grumpy guy, but he gets just like this little like stink about him. Like he's just not happy-go-lucky. And then when we have sex, it just like instantly improves his mood and we're much more connected. Right. But I could see how that tension of like, well, I need to be connected first and then we have sex. Well, I can only be connected after we have sex.
That's the ultimate
no wonder
balance,
people
right? Right. No wonder why people are having a hard time.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the ultimate balance, right? So that's like yin yang right there. I mean, the ultimate balance of, and I'm not saying that masculine, feminine needs to equate to man, woman, because it does not. Right. But that's what Tantra is. Like it's the balance of masculine and feminine energies, is that feeling of oneness that we can have within ourselves, but also with other people. And so so it's such an interesting thing to get to, because what's going to come first, right? So if a man feels more like he needs to be sexual to feel connected, and again, it's not all the time, not every case, and a woman needs to feel more emotionally connected to be sexual.
Right. When do you have the sex?
When is that going to happen? And who's gonna play
sacrifice a little bit?
And
that might not be the right word.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for the right word too.
It's a tug and a push and pull, tug of war. Yeah.
Right? It's like, what's going to come first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah. Right? So like, is the person going to be sexual and then feel more connected and then they're going to have that need fulfilled? Or if it's in a, man-woman relationship, does the man need to become more sexual to have that pillow talk for 20 minutes or do all of these other things to make her feel nurtured and connected in order to get that? And that is one of the things that happens. That's where people get stuck. That's where people get stuck in their relationships and need to find compromise. That's where it says, okay, well, if I'm not willing to do this right now, then what am I willing to do? Right.
That.
So like if I don't have it in me to be sexual with you, instead of saying no and making them feel shut down and discouraged and rejected,
everyone goes off their own ways.
That's the cycle, right? It's like if my partner is saying no, and even though it's because their breasts belong to my baby or like all of these other reasons, if they're saying no, then what happens very oftentimes is that someone's internalizing it and making them feel as though that it's them, that there's something wrong with them. Right. They're not attractive. Like that's oftentimes one of the first places that people go. And it could have nothing to do with that.
Well, we're going to switch gears a little bit here, but like I went out with a couple of friends of mine on Saturday night and we're having this discussion loudly at the bar, but body image for me affects my desire to be sexual, or it did, because I'm in this like new place where it doesn't. I'm in a really good sexual place. This is part of why we're here. But I used to, like, if I gained a few pounds or I wasn't feeling myself, I would not want to have sex. And I could see how my partner, and we would have this conversation, and he's like, is it me? You know, because I would just reject. And I'm like, no, it's me. I love you. I'm totally attracted to you, but I'm not into my own body right now.
That's just it.
And so, but I could see how that, even though it's totally had nothing to do with him, how he could internalize that and be like, I don't know what's going on, but it's got to be me.
It happens really all the time. And that's where the focus needs to switch to not just what my partner can do for me, but what can I be doing for myself? Like what's going to make you feel empowered? What's going to make you feel connected to your body? What's going to make you feel sexy? What's going to make you feel sensual? And that's different for everybody.
Definitely.
For, me, very oftentimes it's quite honestly going to yoga. Like that's what, or being at the beach or, taking a long shower or like having a really good conversation with my partner where they're attentive and I feel understood, right? That's one of the biggest things in this whole picture is the ability to feel understood and heard and to have empathy, right? There's that emotional piece of it that's needed very oftentimes for somebody to even want to be giving of themselves or want to be receptive of that kind of attention or pleasure. So that's another piece that people need to start tuning into. And then, other things that couples can be doing is set up your village, making sure you have, other people's support around.
The basic needs met.
The basic needs met so that you can, and also that you need to take the time for each other, even if it's 10 minutes a day, a 10-minute connect where nothing else is distracting you. It could be you're looking at each other. It could be you're breathing together. I mean, you're breathing anyway. So you could may as well do it together. So like you don't have energy for anything else, but you have to breathe anyhow. So lay down next to each other and just sync up your breathing.
Yeah.
I do that with my kids even all the time. Like that's half of my morning meditation is my son will crawl into my bed and I'll sit there and I'll just pay attention to his breathing that, is happening. So I need to do it more with my partner. I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
Right.
So that's another thing that people can be doing. But you need to schedule the time too. And I think that a lot of people think that because sex is supposed to be, and I have quotes up, right, supposed to be spontaneous, is that we don't schedule it in. And that people think that it ruins the spontaneity. But when you think about when you first started to date, wasn't it all scheduled? For most people, right? When you start dating, it's like, oh, I'm going to pick you up at what time. So what do we do? Right. We prep.
Yeah.
Right? We get ready. We get excited. So like, why is it any different now?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
We schedule sex all the time. We have so much scheduled sex. And I do love, and we have had this spontaneous, like, oh my God, the kids are not here and you're super hot. Let's do it. But I love it because we text each other all day. Like, I'm going to jump your bones later. And like, this like sexual stuff back and forth. It's fun though, because this is just for everybody to know now, but like I get very horny during the day. But during the day that I'm working, he's working, or if it's the weekend, the kids are around. So it's this fun like build up where I can like capitalize on the feelings I have during the day and translate them into nighttime.
Yeah.
But it's nice to schedule it in that way because it's like something we're both looking forward to.
That's it. And I think people have a really hard time wrapping their head around like, oh, I have to schedule this. It's like, well, look at all the benefits that can come from that.
Right. I love it. I think that's great. So before we sign off, I want to hear from you about how you incorporate your sexual therapy practice into Sea Change.
So there are a couple of different ways. I mean, the other practitioners that are here, we have acupuncture, massage therapy, a physical therapist that specializes in pelvic floor physical therapy and my abdominal release, because a lot of things go on even in the abdomen that pregnant women or postpartum women need support with. So the practitioners that I've chosen to work out of here all specialize in working with that population in terms of sexual health and reproductive health. And so like for people who are coming for sex therapy, if they need acupuncture or PT, that can help them with that. That's why I was very particular about who I chose to join the practice, right? Or if women who are dealing with some postpartum issues, pelvic floor dysfunction, or diastasis, or other kinds of things that could come up, they are able to treat that. So I wanted to make sure that the other practitioners that I did bring into the space was able to address the majority of the concerns that the population that I serve here. And then in terms of the yoga that we do, the yoga also, it's not a typical yoga center, although we do have regular yoga classes on the schedule, but we have many prenatal and postnatal classes to choose from. And then over time, we'll also be incorporating some more sexuality-driven types of classes. So like other types of movement classes. We'll be starting, I don't know when I'll start it, but I'll be starting a Tantra gathering probably once a month. So we're just trying to make sure that sexuality piece is addressed in much of the work that we do with another therapist that we have specializes in perinatal loss. And so I'm not sure if that completely answers your question.
It does. It absolutely
but I just want to kind of...
all the practitioners, all the offerings incorporate everything we've talked about, as sex is not compartmentalized into this like other thing. It's all wrapped up in all of your offerings. So thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Heather. As usual, it was spectacular. And I hope that all of our listeners will check out Sea Change Holistic Wellness Center.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having us be part of your village.
Of course. Thanks, Heather.